and welcome to the inaugural broadcast of Indy Talks, a monthly interview show produced by the Hudson Independent newspaper, the most trusted source of news in the river towns. My name is Barrett Seaman. I'm the chair of the editorial board of the paper. We're going to start out today big. Our first interview is with our new county executive, George Latimer, who has joined us here this morning. And thank you for coming and taking the time.
Barrett, thank you very much, and I'm very happy to be your inaugural guest.
The big question, I think, a lot of people in the river towns, and I suspect all over the county, is what's going to happen to our taxes. This morning's Journal News had a headline that you've got a $28.7 million shortfall in the budget.
Right.
The question everybody has is, how are you going to, you didn't create these problems, but you inherited them, but nonetheless, you got to face it. Will you be able to balance the budget without raising taxes?
Well, you know, I think you asked the question that's on everybody's mind, but I'm frustrated by the fact that that's always the first question instead of the last question. Westchester County government is structured to do certain regional functions by state law and by common sense. The state law requires us to administer social service programs, to fund Medicaid, to provide public health services, and common sense is that we have to have a bus system to help those who don't have automobiles, usually the poor, the seniors, have transport to treat sewage and so forth. Because what the county government does is not necessarily understood or used by everybody. Not everybody interacts with the prison system or the probation system. And because we don't get the kind of central attention that you would get out of New York City media, where you follow the national news and then perhaps New York City news, most people don't understand what the county government does. Because of that, the default question is always about my taxes. And what's happened is, for the prior 8 years, we've made every public policy question a referendum on, are my taxes going to go up or not? And in so doing, I believe, we've decimated those services that we have to provide. Now, no one wants to get a 101 lecture on what government is and should be. So my responsibility is to look at this county government here in my 5th month on the job, to determine what are the changes that make sense at Playland, at the airport, in the delivery of the services that we do provide, county police, sewerage, bus, and then out of that make intelligent fiscal policies that by November will become part of a budget for 2019, and in that document we'll see what we can do in terms of the property taxes. You've had a policy, and this is what was litigated in last year's election. Rob Astorino was known to all. He had won 2 terms. He'd won them both very comfortably. I was known in part of the county, but certainly not in the river towns, and part of the county did not know who I was, but the part that did understood what my public record was. And we debated these issues, and I was very clear that I had no intent to raise taxes, but I intended to run the government intelligently. Now, what do I mean by that? And I'm going to answer your question when I get to, I want to show you the flow that gets to the answer. The flow is this. You cannot author a deal to sell off Westchester County Airport with only the dollar and cents impact in mind. You cannot make an arrangement to privatize Playland services with only the dollar and cents in mind, because these are assets that provide service to people, whether it's recreational or transportation, and they also represent iconic traditions that we've inherited. If you accept the fact that it's only about my taxes, then you're going to burn the furniture for firewood. And at some point in time, you'll be out of firewood and you're out of furniture, and you'll still need to keep yourself warm. Having said all of that, I don't think the gap that we see here, the $28 million gap, is insuperable. We're looking right now at how do we generate non-property tax revenue that can help us offset some of that. Part of that will come from our work on shared services, where we're working with the villages, the towns, and the cities to try to figure out how do we repurpose the way we deliver certain services and find some economies of scale. That's a cost reduction element. And then in addition to that, the state is prepared to incentivize counties that have a robust plan. So we may find ourselves entitled to X million dollars of additional state aid to implement the plan. We're looking at creative ways to do things such as rent out space for various solar panels to be placed, tops of garages, maybe at the mound up at Croton Point Park, recycling mound. And if we can do that and be paid by solar companies for that privilege, that's a revenue stream that's not property tax. It's things like that that we will try to put together as part of a plan, so that by the time we reach the fall, and we're looking to how do we close this year's budget and how do we prepare next year's budget, that we can reduce what might look like a huge tax increase if you just try to solve it by taxes.
I want to get back to Playland and Rye in a second, but speaking of shared services, you've had one meeting, you're going to have a series of meetings over the summer on this subject. How much can you actually achieve in that? Everybody agrees it's a good idea,
Right.
but when you get down to the nuts and bolts of it, a lot of people don't want to give up their control over their individual village DPWs and police and all that.
Well, I think the county has to first make it convenient for the community, the village, the town, the city, usually a small city, because the cities the size of Yonkers are almost governments as big as Westchester County. But for the smaller communities, we have to be able to give you a comparable by which you can say, we can keep this service under our direct control of the village hall, or we can go into a regional compact at the county level and know what the delta of dollars saved would be. So if the county takes on a back-of-the-house function, whether it's purchasing or assessment or accounting, and we do that, or we do a front-of-the-house function, and you have some of this is done in police services in a few of the communities in the county, could be DPW, could be a couple of other things. You'll know how much you could save by plugging into a county system versus maintaining it on your own. New York is a home rule state, so villages and towns and cities are not forced to do what the county mandates them to do in terms of combination. But if we give you a menu, as if you go into a restaurant, you can pick an appetizer that you'd like, and you can skip the entree, or have an entree you'd like and skip the dessert. If we can make it that simple for a municipal government, then a government can look at it, make some rational choices, and you'll see the natural combination voluntarily rather than being imposed by some sort of mandate. That's the philosophy of where we're heading. As I said, we've done it already in some functions to some degree, and now the question is, can we do it more robustly across a host of municipalities? But we're not going to put a gun to the head of a village or a town and say, you will do this. This will have to be the decision made in the Village Hall of Irvington, the Village Hall of Sleepy Hollow, the Town Hall of Mount Pleasant, to determine if they want to combine with others or if they want to continue to operate separately.
Right. The big chunk of property taxes, of course, comes out of schools.
Far and away.
Right. So what can you do? There are a lot of very small schools around the area that probably could merge, but you've got huge emotional stuff tied up into keeping your own little school and your own Irvington Bulldogs and the
Right.
Hastings Yellow Jackets.
Ryeneck Panthers and the Rye Garnets, which
Exactly.
was once a merger possibility that failed at the ballot box. Well, they said a long time ago in the cartoon strip Pogo, we've met the enemy and he is us.
Right.
So we, the voters, we the citizens, not we the politicians, have to decide how much of the tax burden that we have is so intense that we're prepared to change the way we operate. And change is all around us. You and I are both seeing it. As young men, you buy a newspaper, you get a broadsheet newspaper, tabloid, you read the newspaper. Nowadays, you pull a cell phone out of your pocket, you get the news that way. And you can see that newspapers are suffering greatly and many are dying. People sit at home and they shop online in their pajamas and they don't go out and walk through the downtown bricks and mortar street, and you have less traffic. So what do newspapers and what do retailers do? You try to figure out how to reposition what they do. They have an online presence. In both cases, they try to get a certain amount of revenue from that online presence to offset what they lose walking in the front door or picking up something at a newsstand. Similarly, governments have to look at that, but people have to recognize that if the complaints over taxes, which are universal, everybody, no one is happy with the tax burden they have. And in community A, you pay less than you pay in community B, but community A people are unhappy too. So in that kind of a situation, you put the choice back on the individual. We're going to give you a referendum opportunity to lower your taxes by taking a particular action. And now it's your choice as to what you think is the best strategy for you. But I have to caution, you deal with uneven levels of services from community A to community B, and I'll give you the most obvious example, fire services. City of White Plains, City of New Rochelle, City of Mount Vernon, full paid professional fire departments that are branches of the city government. Mamaroneck, Katona, Bedford Hills, full volunteer departments, not a paid soul in between. How do you rationalize that? And how do you say, well, now if you're going to have full paid professional, you get this, but it's going to cost you this? That's very hard to merge. And that's going to take the decision of people as to what they're comfortable with.
Right, okay. On Playland and the airport, two big issues. Astorina was going to privatize both. What is the future now of those two?
Well, the future in both cases is we're going to have an open public discussion about the future of both places, and it's going to involve the Board of Legislators and the executive branch and the people who live in Westchester County. You did not have that kind of open dialogue the last time. In the case of the airport, you had at budget time, which means mid-November, a plan in 2016 presented to the Board of Legislators. The budget was predicated on doing that plan, which meant a $15 million revenue. A year later, the same thing. A budget predicated on a $20 million revenue stream by doing a privatization deal. Nowhere along the line was there a broad-based opportunity for people to comment, to understand what it was. It's here, here's a dollar and cents impact, do it, or you've blown a hole in the budget, you plug the hole. That's not the way you need to do public policy. And in terms of the airport, we have no deal on the table. It is whatever the Board of Legislators and ultimately our executive branch determine we want to do, if we want to do anything. Because we've got to keep in mind, whenever you take a function and you change the governance and you put it in the hand of a private entity, you'll get money for that, but once you do that, you lose control over it. And if somebody says, well, there's a lot of planes going to the airport, we don't like it, don't come to me, go to a corporation whose intent is to make profit, not necessarily to listen to your complaints. And down at Playland, you're looking at a historic, traditional function. Once you put it in the hands of some other entity, you may or may not determine that entity will maintain certain elements of that park. They may decide that, yes, it's traditional, Art Deco, but it's more efficient if we completely repurpose it. You have to be sure that's what you want to do before you do it. In the case of the Playland deal, which is a deal that was struck, we've had an analysis done by Director of Operations, Joan McDonald, and our County Attorney, John Nolan, both new and highly professional individuals, and they pointed out some significant flaws in the deal that do not benefit the public. So we've publicly vetted that report so that the press and the public can see it, and now there's a rediscussion of whether or not this particular deal is the right deal and whether or not the privatization makes sense. Let me add one more coda to this whole area. There is a general perception that every time you privatize something, that's an automatic good thing. You're getting a private entity to pick up some public obligation, so I don't have to pay for it. I spent 20 years in business working for some subsidiaries of major corporations. Businesses do not decide to pick up somebody else's obligation for nothing. They get involved in a negotiation if it is profitable for the business. And by the way, I don't begrudge them making a profit. What I do want to make sure is that we're not just devolving an asset because philosophically we don't believe in government. And I think that was the philosophy of my prior administration. They believed that government should be shrunken just philosophically. And you see that strain in American politics right down to Washington, D.C. Let's get out of regulating on the environment. Let's get out of regulating what happens on Wall Street. Philosophically, they don't believe in that. Well, I'm a pragmatist, not an ideologue. There are times when the public-private partnership makes sense. We're very close to reauthorizing the Liberty Lines public-private partnership that governs our bus system. Whether or not we should have one of those deals on Playland is open-ended. And I don't view it automatically as a negative, and I don't view it automatically as a positive. I want to make what I think is the best deal for Westchester County residents.
Right. Okay. Switching subjects, you signed the immigration protection bill that Astorino had vetoed. Are you seeing any tangible results from that yet? Is there?
Well, it's just in the process of being implemented.
Right.
There's a certain amount of days when it was signed into law that it had to implement it. We've had to put some protocols together for the county police and the county corrections departments. Keep in mind that the bill was changed a bit in this cycle. What was done this year was different from last year. My predecessor vetoed it, didn't believe in it philosophically. We said, we understand that the law enforcement community has some concerns about it, put them at the table. And so representatives of the county police, the county corrections department, probation as well, came to the table, reshaped the bill a little bit to an area of comfort where they felt they could actually administer it. And in administering it properly, that was the bill that was passed by the board, which I signed into law. It is not a sanctuary city bill.
Right.
People who call it that are approaching this from an ideological standpoint. They are really part of that quadrant of people who are very agitated over any immigration, and they want no recognition of immigration as a policy issue, and they probably prefer to deport people who are here. Those of us who live in a real world understand there are amongst us immigrants, and they've come from other countries in the same way that my great-grandparents on one side and grandparents on the other side came. The issue of legality is a debatable point, but the real issue is they came to escape persecution and for a better life here. So now the question is, how do we deal with them? How do we deal with them? We deal with them in a practical, humane way, not in an ideological way which says they're not really people, they're aliens, as if they came from Jupiter. And let's, deal with them in less than the way we would deal with a citizen. So they interact with the criminal justice system. There's a community policing model, which we have put into effect by this bill. We'll see how it works. I don't think you're going to see the kind of incidents that the opponents predicted. And I think in a year's time from now, people will say it was a very reasonable thing to do, and it did not upset the
Right.
equilibrium.
And you have not heard anything from the Trump administration in terms of
No.
their coming after you?
No, and they might. Look, my predecessor had a big public spat with the Obama administration over the HUD program, and that spat lasted 7 years. We lost $35 million in federal aid for CDBG money, Community Development Block Grant money,
Right.
and home improvement money. And it's not just acronyms. That's money that the village of Tarrytown could have used for improvements in the heart of its community, or used as well by any of the other river towns. That willingness by my predecessor to fight with the federal government came over his ideological objection to what the Obama administration was trying to accomplish with fair housing. Now you've got two reversals: different county administration, different federal administration. It's the federal administration that wants to move far to the right. It's my administration that wants to be practical in these things. If they come after us in terms of our law, we will defend what we've done. We think it's extremely defensible. It is not what San Francisco has done or some other communities. But of course, at the end of the day, any federal official that comes in the door with a judicial warrant has authority over any local policing. So our legislation subjects itself to whatever a federal court might do. So if in fact the Trump administration and the Supreme Court that he's put into place decides they want to take a different attitude on immigrants, it'd be much more difficult. We as a county are not going to be able to stop that, but we are just not going to go along with it as Joe Arpaio did down in Arizona and sort of embrace the anti-immigrant movement of the moment.
Another Astorino position that you reversed was on the gun shows. You banned them now in the county. It's been suggested that you are doing, in effect, a mirror image of what Trump was doing to Obama. You're step by step, piece by piece, dismantling the policies that he had. Is that a conscious move on your part? Or
No, but I think during the campaign, I was very clear that I thought that the gun show ban was an appropriate one. Keep in mind, the original gun show ban was by Andy Spano. It was Rob Astorino that reversed the policy.
Right.
And then, interestingly, he reversed himself when he eliminated it the year right after Sandy Hook. The sensitivity was very high about having a gun show in 2005 after those poor little children were murdered in Sandy Hook in the prior December. And then he reinstituted it again. What I did was return to a prior rational policy, which, by the way, was in effect for about 10 years before Rob reversed it. So I think what I did was perfectly rational. Now, here's the situation. I've complimented my predecessor when I thought he's done some positive things. I praised Kevin Plunkett, the former deputy county executive. I think he did a terrific job. Where we may have disagreed in philosophy, he certainly was out in the community doing things that were positive. But I made a statement, if that's what you're looking for, very early on about the gun shows. Second day on the job, executive order to ban it. But it was backed up by the Board of Legislators on a supermajority vote, voting legislation to ban the gun show. And I have to tell you, I know there are people out there who feel this is an attack on the Second Amendment. I don't interpret it that way at all. The Second Amendment allows you the right to bear arms. It allows you the right to have your long arms and your pistols, and there's some rules that you have to follow, but they don't take them away from you. This takes nothing away from your right. It just says we won't sponsor a gun show on a county-owned facility.
Right. It looks like you have finally resolved the affordable housing situation with West Health. That's now going to go through as a 74-unit senior living proposal. At the same time, Westchester County is now seeing record sales in homes of over $2 million, carrying property taxes that sometimes reach 6 figures. Is there any message in there? Is Westchester becoming kind of ground zero for the disparity in income that we see on a national basis?
Well, I think you see in Westchester County, some of the highest property values as well as some of the highest property taxes. It's very simple. I asked my dad once when he moved after the war from Brooklyn to Westchester, Dad, why did you come here? He was a blue-collar guy, worked with his hands all his life. He said 2 reasons in his blunt way. It's not New York City, it's near New York City, and it's not New York City. and if you think about it, that's exactly what Westchester's appeal is. We're right close to the greatest city in the world, the most strongest economic engine of any municipality in the world, and yet we offer a different quality of life to the city with that proximity. So we get attraction from people moving into the metropolitan area who want to come into Ardsley, Dobbs Ferry, Irvington, Hastings, Rye, Briarcliff, Armonk, Bronx. Tremendous demand to come in. That demand has pushed out, by market reasons, not by tax reasons, by market reasons, people who work like my dad and mom did. And so therefore, we have an obligation, I believe, to build as much as we can, as in practical settings, affordable housing. This deal that we struck on West Elm, this place lay fallow for 7 years, unresolved. The project was caught between a 54-unit commitment on one hand and a practical response that said we need to do at least 74 units to make the place workable. We moved forward on the 74-unit direction, and all of a sudden, as if by magic, everybody came together. I had a disparate issue, completely away from housing. Miller House, George Washington headquarters during the Battle of White Plains, over in North Castle, Virginia Road. The place was laying decrepit and collapsing, and for the lack of a decision to move forward on renovation of it, it was about ready to crumble down. We made the decision, $2 million to save an historic landmark, and that was done, and we have universal support for it, and it shows you that we can make pragmatic decisions in a variety of different areas and bring people together and solve things that seemed unsolvable over the period of time. And it wasn't me, it's we. It's us together doing it. That's one of the greatest, I'm going off of your question, but I apologize, but this is one of the biggest things I think we have to change in American politics. This concept of the singular decision maker, who is all wise and all seeing. This is a democracy of we. We sit down, we hammer it out. You have to have somebody to sort of lead the meeting, but at the end of the day, we make a decision that makes sense. That's what happened at West Elm. That's what happened at the Miller House. And I believe, over the 4 years that I had this opportunity, that's what I believe we can do in Westchester County.
Right. Okay. You have a couple of employment-related policies that you've adopted, the Wage History and Discrimination Act, which you just passed, which seems kind of a no-brainer to keep people from having to be locked into what their previous salaries were.
Right.
The other one, though, is the Ban the Box bill, which
Right.
is where people are no longer required to say whether or not they have a criminal background. The second one strikes me as carrying a little bit of a risk. In Irvington, we recently had a murder in a restaurant where a young woman was hired as a dishwasher 2 weeks earlier, and it turns out she had a past violent criminal record. So how do you mitigate those?
Well, let's do the Ban the Box first, then the salary history. On Ban the Box, it was an executive order that applied to all applications for jobs within Westchester County. The legislature is considering, county legislature is considering legislation of a more broad scope that would affect all businesses in Westchester County. They're getting business input on that. We will find in time that many major employers, retailers, have also already banned the box. Here's what ban the box means. On your application, you're not asked the question about whether you've been arrested or have any past criminal history. If in the initial cut of 35 resumes for one position, if you make that initial cut based on what your resume says, then you're called in for an interview. In the interview, it's perfectly legal to ask you about your criminal background. But at that time, you can explain what happened. I was, I'm 42, I'm actually 64, but I'm 42, and this happened when I was 19. You check the box,
Right.
You did it at 19, you completed whatever your payment to society was by the time you were 23, and now for the rest of your life, the checking of that box gets you
Right.
culled out of an analysis. But it can be asked by any employer when they come in and sit down and actually interview the employee, and then if they feel that the employee, their skill set is worth the risk. What you may have in a situation, I don't know the specifics, what you may have in that situation is employment in restaurant settings that happen really fast. You just hire people. You don't really interview them, you don't do any background check on them, and sometimes you barely even look at the application. If you've worked at some other restaurants, well, you're working at this restaurant. And so I think you have to look at what Ban the Box actually does in a setting. The purpose behind it is very simple. If a person's paid their debt to society, they have to be given the opportunity to try to find employment going forward. Now, on the salary history situation, very simply, that was passed unanimously, and I think you accurately indicated it had universal support, passed unanimously, both sides of the aisle were supportive of it. And we had bipartisan support on the Immigrant Protection Act. We had universal support on the Miller House and universal support on West Elm. So a lot of these things are bipartisan. On the salary history situation, we basically said is that if I have a job and I priced it between 75 to 85, and I've interviewed you and I like you, but based on what your resume, where you've worked, I haven't asked you how much you've made, I look at where you've worked, I offer you the low end of 75. That's my prerogative. You decide to take it, you counter offer me, you walk away, or I walk away from the arrangement. But if I ask you what you made in the last job, and you tell me 65 or 60, I can bring my numbers south of that, and I can lock you in at a lower salary, and that's what happens to women all the time. Happens to young employees, happens to people of color, it certainly happens to women who back out into the marketplace. So we think it's a wise decision.
Okay. We're running out of time here, but I do want to ask you about the string of nor'easters that we had this past winter, where a lot of people suffered an awful lot of damage, and you came out very hard against the executives' comment. You called for them to be fired from their jobs. Last I looked, they were still in their jobs, so that didn't happen, but what's been the progress since then?
Well, you know, for people who've known me for a long time, and I understand most of your viewers won't, I almost never lose my temper. When you saw that video that went viral, I lost my temper. That was day 6 of a crisis where we were getting corporate speak, and believe me, I've been in corporate life, I know what corporate speak sounds like when I hear it, that was not sensitive to the needs of people in the county that I represent. I was out every night during that event to travel different corners of this county to find out what the on-the-ground circumstances were and liaise with people. And I felt that the leadership of the 2 utility companies did not do that. Look, when I called for the head, did I think they were going to voluntarily offer it? No. But I wanted to rattle their cage. I wanted them to know that the people who were suffering and were not being heard were being heard through an elected representative voice. And I don't begrudge people their compensation. The compensation for a utility head is significant, millions of dollars. You need to set up shop in the area that's being affected by the crisis. You need to show your face out there. You need to make sure there's liaison between the police chief that you didn't listen to, the village mayor that you didn't listen to, and help take your resources and mesh them with the DPW department. It got better after that, and I look forward for cooperation going forward. But there are times when a forceful voice is necessary. Down in Washington, you're getting a forceful voice on every single possible thing, you know, and tweeting about all different things. I use that when I think it's necessary. I want sweet reasonability as much as I can, but I'm not afraid to stand up for the people that have elected me, and I'm not afraid to lose an election in the future because I'm going to be timid while I'm in the office. I'm going to do what I think is right, and then you get every opportunity to judge whether I've used this opportunity wisely or not.
Do you tweet?
I do. But I tweet about how bad my Mets are, or I tweet about I hope
You
that
don't do
Justify
policy.
wins the Preakness.
You don't do policy tweets?
A little bit. Well, I won't introduce a policy position in a Twitter tweet, you know.
Right.
Seems a little unfair to the people affected by it.
Okay. You've been in office now 5 months, more or less?
4.5, yeah.
Any surprises?
I think basically the fact that it's, the diversity in the county is really great. You have urban areas that are just like the Bronx. You have areas that are just like rural Hudson Valley, New York, and somehow all those policies have to come together in some cohesive fashion. I've got some terrific people who work for me. I probably couldn't do 85% of the jobs that exist in county government because you need specialized training in law enforcement or law, whatever it is, medical, healthcare. But I'm trying to show direction and an energy to lead.
Great. Mr. Latimer, thank you for coming. It's been a good session. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Good luck on the rest of your interviews.
Thank you.